Hi, Darrell.
Hey.
Hey, Ben.
Well, I've been okay in spite of everything.
Are you feeling better?
Yeah, I feel fine. I'm over the COVID, but
Yeah.
we've had a lot going on this week. But I was thinking about this a few minutes ago as I was getting everything ready to head back here and talk with you. Um, Something interesting that's been kind of developing over the last couple of weeks is there will be these thoughts about say things like today, or maybe something happens that's really stressful or troubling, and the thought will just pop up. The thought just comes up on its own. The thought will just pop up. Oh, that was terrible, or oh god, that was really uncomfortable, or that was really stressful. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when that happens, it gets caught. They're a pretty good gatekeeper is developing, because it'll get
Amazing.
caught and go, really? Is that so? And I'll look at it, take a minute to look at it, like, no, not really. Like that's really not the case at all. And it was the same thing with this a little while ago. I was hanging up my keys and trying to work my way back here, and a thought popped up around this whole week, culminating in today, and some kind of thought about it being stressful or something like that, and it kind of stopped me. It's, really? Is that true? Like, no. It
That's
feels the body feels a little bit of tension.
yeah,
There's a sense of a push, to about doing things, but
yeah.
that's just a push and just some tension. It's not really stressful or whatever it is that voice in the mind painted it out as.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, because I'm glad you said that because the first thing I was going to ask was about, what's going on in the body at that point. When you have that thought, or, obviously you can't rewind exactly, but when you first recognize that you're having that thought, which isn't actually true, in the body right then, how, what is the sensation that that thought
Hmm.
is trying to escape from or divert you from?
Say that again about the thought and diverting.
Yeah, so the thought of like, oh, I don't need this right now, or this is so, I don't want didn't want this to happen today, or whatever. That thought is there to divert you from feeling whatever's in the body. So I'm curious because you're recognizing,
Ah,
yeah, so you're recognizing that thought, and then, but I'm curious as to what was happening just before the thought, or at the very least, what's going on as soon as that thought is recognized.
yeah. Well, that you mentioned something that I'm going to have to learn to uh, start to look for, to remember to look for, because I don't know that I always or even frequently look at what's going in the body. Usually it's more kind of a head thing, kind of an analysis of what are the things, what are the components of the story
Yeah,
that are creating, or creating this impression, or trying to sell this idea. But I don't know that in this instance, I did, just because it was really conspicuous.
hmm
But I would say the other times, I don't know that the body really gets taken into account.
yeah, it's super, super helpful to do that because then we can start to figure out, okay, what is this feeling in the body related to? What is it there trying to, because there's something where, excuse me, there's something where whatever is going on in that situation that you're finding stressful, there's a similarity that's being flagged to something else that has happened in the past. So basically the body is recognizing a situation, something that seems similar to a situation that had a negative outcome. There's a potential for something bad happening that you don't want to happen, something like that. And it sends off this little warning light of no, 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 been here before. Let's avoid that. And then that triggers one of these thoughts of, don't want to do that, should be doing something else, blah, blah, blah. And this is just a way of trying to divert you from a situation that
Huh.
you know, it's the problem is it's not always accurate, and it's not always something that can actually be, you can do anything with. There's the idea that because we get an anxiety sensation, it means that we're supposed to be doing something. We have to do something on it. But the sensation itself doesn't give you any suggestions as to what to do. And it doesn't mean that in that particular situation that there is anything that you can do. But you have the feeling like you're supposed to do something, which gives you this conflict of, I don't know what to do. I'm just in this constant state of anxiety, and it seems pointless, but it's because it's trying to get you to do something without any clear indication of what there is to be done.
Although I have noticed that more often than not, assumptions are made about what should happen or how to handle things.
Yeah. Yeah. Also that.
I mean, it's not. I mean, you're right. The sensation itself, whatever's going on in the body, isn't saying anything, but the mind will start to make noise, and oh, you need to do this. This should happen. Whatever. But what's been interesting about all of this is, see if I can actually put this in words. It's been interesting to see how something that for so long has been assumed to be true and substantial actually is pretty insubstantial.
Mm.
That, I mean, when I stop and look at it, normally these things will get turned into some degree or another of, some kind of, maybe not a big deal, but they will have some kind of import. It's like, yeah, wow, you really need to, this is something that deserves attention, or, gosh, I really need to just talk to someone about this, or whatever the case may be. But now when I'm catching these things, looking at them, seeing this, like, no, this is really just, a concocted story, and it doesn't really have any life of its own.
Yeah.
So really been interesting to see, and this is the part that's hard to talk about with words, how the simplest way I can think to say it leaves way too much out that I'm not able to really find a way to convey. But the fact that I've been telling myself these lies in effect for my whole life. Yeah. I mean, these really believable stories that really aren't true.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely true. And how does that feel when you have this kind of recognition?
Gosh, that's another one that's hard to find words for. There's a sense of there's another one of those words that's kind of problematic because it's freighted with language thanks to the movie, but it feels kind of like getting out of the matrix.
Mm.
There's this stuff that we do, and everyone does it, and it's so much of how we live our lives. And if I told one of my neighbors this, they would look at me like I'm nuts. Yeah, they would not understand it. Most people would, well, what do you mean? It really was stressful. It was a big deal. And yeah, Susanna came dangerously close to death, but she didn't. And it's over.
Yep.
But someone will say, well, your wife almost died. And like, yeah, so it is a big deal. Like, no, it's not. It's really not.
It is something that we run into a lot, I think, in almost having to play the game in normal society.
Yes, it's very much a sense of getting to step out of this social fabric, social game. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and unless you want people to think you're a complete weirdo, it is just like you just kind of go along with it, like, yeah, thank you. It was very difficult, thank you, and just let it go because it is one of those issues where you really can't explain what it's like in your situation to somebody else who has never done any of this stuff, and to them it just makes you sound like some heartless narcissist or something that
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
Um, so. So I think there's nothing wrong with just taking the taking it as it's given from the person and taking
Mm.
the source into account.
Yeah, and there was something else like that too that, oh, I know what it was. Emotions, feelings are getting kind of a similar, um, they're taking a similar path, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I'll be glancing a lot because I've got Sweetie back here so I can keep an eye on her because she can't, well,
She has
actually, I took the cone off because it was creating all kinds of problems.
uh,
So I'm having to keep an eye on her and make sure she doesn't lick herself. So,
absolutely.
um, but so far she doesn't seem interested, fortunately. So anyway, it was one of the days when Susanna was at the hospital and I was driving over to spend the afternoon with her. And um, there was this song playing, and try not to get long-winded about it, but the song comes from the context of the guy wrote this song after his wife and daughter both had died within less than it was 10 months. First his daughter died, and then 10 months later his wife died.
Wow.
And so he's writing a song about he basically just he left everything behind. He got on a motorcycle and just spent months riding all over Canada and North America,
Wow.
to just kind of deal with it. The only way he could deal with it was to constantly be on the move.
Yeah.
And so the song is playing. I'm on my way over to see Susanna, and so all of a sudden, this sense of sadness starts to well up, and as soon as it started to happen, immediately caught him like, what's really going on here? Am I really sad? And this all happened within just seconds. I realized, or I could see clearly that I wasn't sad. What happened was there was this sensation around the eyes, this tension, and
Yeah.
it even felt like it was kind of in the eyes, which maybe his muscles contracting and putting pressure on the eyes.
Yeah.
And that got recognized as something that comes along with sadness. So the mind said, oh, sad. And then that got turned into a story, which of course is believable because you've been telling yourself that story for decades.
Absolutely.
But I saw it, and I saw it all distilled down to it was just a sensation around it in the eyes,
Yeah.
and that set off this chain reaction labeled sad. And as soon as I did that, it evaporated. I mean, it had no legs to stand on, just swept away.
Love that.
And
That's
it really floored me. I mean, it really got my attention because of the fact that here's something that, I mean, songs are written about sadness, and it's, I mean, it has so much gravitas,
yeah. Yeah.
socially. I mean, it has all of this weight associated with it. And I just swept it away, just analyzed it, saw it for what it was, and swept it away. And
What was that?
that's Susanna probably trying to do something. Tuesday's in the shower, so I told her, I said, well, inevitably something's going to happen and you're going to need help. I'm
Yeah.
hoping we'll see what happens. Anyway, what a day. Um,
Yeah.
but in that moment, it really seemed to kind of pull the rug out from underneath, not just the emotions showing up in that moment, but emotions in general. I mean, it just seems like somehow it left that part of the human experience significantly less believable than it had been before.
Yeah. Yeah. That is absolutely amazing. And that is exactly the case, that all of our emotions are just physical sensations with thoughts that are associated with them and tacked together. They become this thing that we think is super, super real. So that is absolutely well seen. I will throw in one small caveat just to, cover the bases and make sure is that
Okay.
it is possible So it's a really useful tool to have, and it's a really amazing insight to have because it breaks apart part of the identification of myself as a depressed person or myself as someone who is always prone to this kind of emotion or another, or um, just the reality of that, like, I can't help it. When I'm anxious, I can't do a thing about it. Or when I'm angry, I just can't, we feel like the emotion is just this tidal wave that just comes through and absolutely unstoppable thing. But what you're seeing is exactly the opposite of that. That no, no, actually, if you look at what's really happening, it's just a couple little components, and then the rest of it just evaporates on its own. The caveat though is if we're doing like emotion work, like if you're specifically looking at old habits of thinking and feelings of like shame and guilt and fear and not being good enough and this kind of like primal sadness that has been there for decades, if we're looking at that sort of thing, it's easy to fall into the trap of doing exactly that kind of dissection on those. And even though, yes, it gets rid of them for the moment, it doesn't actually solve the underlying issue of this belief in these things. And so it ends up just being a bypass in that moment to
That's
where
what I
we
thought you were going to say.
yeah, so then we end up just not feeling something that we don't want to feel, but it doesn't actually get to the root of why we feel that way to begin with. There's still there's still something which is triggering the emotion which hasn't been seen. So it's like the flower blooms, we cut the head off of it every time we see this okay, so the flower blooms, we see its components, we chop the head off, but the root is still there and it's just going to bloom again if we don't actually get down to the root of what is causing that emotion in the first place.
Right, I see. Well, the one thing about all of this that, and this, this is kind of quasi, I don't know if dangerous is quite the right word. That may be too strong a word, but, kind of verges on potentially dangerous, because, hang on a second.
Mhm.
Let's see what she's doing.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Wow.
there is, I lost my train of thought with all this, with her and
You said it's dangerous because it potentially verges on and then
yeah,
switch.
I'm trying to get back to that. What was the rest of that thought?
Guessing is maybe heading towards nihilism, but I'm not sure if that
No,
was the
I don't think so.
okay.
Well, let me start over again and see if I wind up coming back to it. We're gonna have to deal with some whining because she can't leave the room.
Okay.
Um, so I'm gonna pick her up. There you
Aw.
go.
Hey,
The
sweetie.
the sense is that I know what it was. So the potential danger is that this is at least partly based on some preconceived notions about what this process leads to, whether it's along the way or the final fruits. To use the old saying from the suttas, the holy life has been lived, what needed to be done has been done, all of that. So the expectation or the preconceived notion rather is that there's this disassembling or dismantling of what we think of and experience as reality.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that matrix idea.
Yep.
And um, as these moments have been showing up of like the one with the sensation around the eyes and the sadness just evaporating, and other times of having feelings and emotions come up and being able to analyze them and see that there's really nothing there. There's been kind of this idea in the back of the mind of, great, this is fantastic. We're moving in the direction of really dismantling this matrix thing that we live our lives in. I'm making progress towards getting out of this thing.
Yeah.
But that is the sense. I mean, that is what it feels like. But again, there's a preconceived notion there. I don't know how accurate that is, and I, I'm a bit wary of trying to, for lack of a better way of putting it, live up to um, the experience of what I think this is going to be like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you'll stay there for me, huh?
Mhm.
So,
I think it's a really good instinct to not want to put too many preconceived notions on what it's going to look like in the end. Because exactly as you said, then you just end up with these comparisons, and then you're not really sure whether what you're experiencing is the right thing and the full thing or any of that. Um, what I think is still useful to keep in mind is that when we're talking about this, we're not talking about leaving where we are and getting to a different place, or even leaving the matrix, so to speak, as though it's a completely, well, yeah, on one level it's kind of true, but it's not as though we're completely leaving one realm level of reality for another. We're just seeing what is here without all of the filters in front of it. So we have like all these different colored lenses that skew our view of what's actually here. And all we're doing is just dropping those. And each one of those is a different type of identification, different subtlety of identification, different mental aspect of creating, the sense of distance and the sense of subject object, and the sense that a chair is not just the shape and size of this appearance, but actually it's a chair. It's something I can sit on. It's something that I purchased from an antique store, and it's 300 years old, and it has, we create a whole history around it. And I really like this chair because of, and, or I didn't like this chair, and then I painted it, and then we had a great day the day that we painted it. And, we create all of that stuff around what is just this unnameable, ineffable of a thing. And so it's just seeing like, oh no, there's a layer of thought on that. There's a layer of identification. There's a label of conceptualization. There's a layer of making something into making nothing, making something that is ineffable and not really understandable into something that I can put my hands on, into something that I can understand with a quick snap of the fingers. I know everything there is to know about that chair. And like same with a person. We do that with members of your family, with political figures, and everybody in between, to where we have the idea that I know that person. And of course we don't. We have a snapshot image that has all of these little notes that we've taken down over the course of the years, but that's all we're relating to. You can never know the full depth of anything or anyone. And so it's just letting go of the grasping onto each of these illusions and each of these levels of identification, until you recognize that everything is your creation. Everything that you experience is just your creation, and that there is no you who's creating it. It's just a unique experience, a unique expression of what is showing up in that moment, and that there's really nothing deeper or more to it or more substantial than this immediate illusion that's appearing.
okay. And that that all makes sense. I mean, um, I can see how that would be the result of this work. Where I kind of get stuck, maybe not stuck is the right word. Something that I carry with me and creates some ideas about all of this. And again, I know that this is not, and I really, as a general rule, I don't, at least not consciously. It's there working in the background, um, uh, even if it's not something that's clearly seen and known in the moment. Is that, first of all, I've had experiences of my own which point towards something pretty profound in terms of further down the road on the path. Or I think about things I've heard other people that I personally have known, like hearing people talking about how there's one woman I know who her field of vision went 2 dimensional
Yeah.
and it's never shifted back.
Oh,
And yeah, and from time to time she'll talk about it, and you get the inevitable questions like, how do you drive? How do you do this? And
yeah.
she's managed to adapt. Um, or um, there was the guy who was for Roshi Tom at the Athens Zen Center, who the famous story about him was he was a manager at a bookstore, and somebody saw him. He didn't know that these people from our group had seen him.
Oh,
He was getting royally chewed out by a very angry woman one day, and the reason they mentioned this story was because they were so impressed by the fact that he was completely unfazed by this woman who was just completely ripping into him.
yeah.
And it didn't surprise me to hear the story because I'd spent some time around the guy, and he really did seem truly unflappable.
Yeah.
Or our old friend Don Murato, talking about when his mom died, and he was talking about how all of that stuff we usually experience in those moments. He said it was all irrelevant,
Yeah.
you know. And then the big one, I think about that one monk, the famous footage from Vietnam War era. He sets himself on fire, and we both know what it feels like to burn our hand, let alone your entire body, and he didn't flinch. It's like,
Oh,
what was that guy's experience of reality like, that he could be on fire and remain perfectly still, I mean,
yeah.
so it's difficult to completely dismiss all of those things and say, okay, I'm just going to leave everything wide open and we'll see what it looks like down the road. um, so those sorts of ideas are there, and so you start to make some headway down the road and feel like, well, I get to kind of step outside of the matrix at some point in time. um, Maybe, whatever that means, but it's I find it difficult to not have some idea about it.
Hmm. And that's reasonable. I think there are some things which are consistent where you might with reason expect to experience some of these things, right? So for instance, the unflappability, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I would say once you have really worked through 4 and 5 heavily and it feels really clear, it's not unreasonable to be in a situation where someone can be going off at you or being in an otherwise what would have been a very stressful personal situation and just be completely unmoved by it because it's not about you. It's
Mm-hmm.
this other person who is just engaging in some sort of, inner turbulence. And there's nothing here for that to affix to or to be to be poking. And so you're just there with compassion for this person who is, in the winds of just uncontrollable emotion. Um, so from that standpoint, that's totally, totally reasonable and totally experienceable. Um, if you have, it's going to be slightly harder if you have like old traumas where you tend to be extra affected by either, excuse me, issues of safety, where you feel like you are unsafe with somebody yelling at you. If you have issues where have always felt like you were in the wrong, and then having anybody point a finger at you or especially lay into you points back to that same old wound. And so then that's going to make it much harder to be unflappable in that situation. But that's why we work with these old emotions and these old wounds and the old feelings, again, without dismantling them right away, because we really want to see what is under there so that somebody can go and be screaming at you, and you recognize in you that this is okay. There's no danger here, and there's nothing about me that they're saying that is true.
Well,
Um,
an interesting other side of the coin to all of that, um, which also creates sometimes this. I don't know if I want to call it a sense of doubt, but it creates some questioning around all of this.
mhm.
I have a friend who she is walking the spiritual path. She just comes at it from a very different angle.
Yeah,
So much so that it's really difficult for the two of us to talk about it
yeah,
because the way we think about it and the language involved, like we really don't understand each other. And especially, I know it's hard for her to some of the things I say she really takes issue with. Case in point is I've said things about this sort of thing,
yeah,
and she's gotten this idea that I think that um, what this kind of work means is getting to a point where you just don't have any feelings at all,
yeah,
and uh, that you're completely untouched and unmoved and don't have any feelings at all. Well, she's right about the untouched and unmoved, but I'm not saying that there aren't any feelings because they still come up. You just they don't have hooks anymore. But she really balks at that idea, and the fact that she balks at it so strongly, it has sometimes caused me to, um, you know, experience a little skepticism. Well, you can be completely wrong about all of this.
yeah.
um,
Yeah. And that's why you have to come back to your own experience. You do the work that feels right and then come back to in your experience because everybody has um I've talked to people who have done work that they feel like they have extinguished all emotions, and they feel like that's the case. But when you talk to them, they have a wide palette of emotions that come out while they're talking. So there is a certain question of, from the outside, does it look different from how it feels on the inside? Is it possible that there's also self-delusion going on? Yes, absolutely. Um, but nobody can ever say what is going on in anybody else's experience. So I can't say, you are having emotions. You don't know because you don't know what they're actually experiencing.
right.
Um, I will say from my standpoint, from Pernilla's and everybody else that I've ever met who has been on this path, uh, leaving all emotions aside is not at all the point, or is it the result? You do end up still feeling the wide palette of emotions. But as you said, there's no hooks into the the more classically negative ones that we call them. You're probably not going to feel anger or things like that anymore because they're reactions. But there's a more primal baseline of emotions like contentment is always there. Joy, happiness, they can be there. Sorrow, grief, sadness, they can arise, but it's like it's in the moment, it's in the motion of these emotions arise. You don't play into them or create stories out of them or something. It's like you watch a movie where, we're so funny like this. So we'll watch a movie and there'll be like, something that's just like really touching in the movie. And we're both just like sobbing because you're just open without this filter of just like it touches something and it's just like, oh, it's so moving or so, so sad or whatever. And you just cry and then it's over. It's not like you're hooking into it or creating any sort of attachment to it or resistance to it or anything. It's just this emotional weather pattern that flows through and moves
Mm,
on. So you probably won't have things like long lingering depression and things like that because that takes constant rumination and constant feeding in of this negative self-referential depress sort of negative thought cycle to keep like a feeling of depression going. So you probably won't have something like that, but just these just passing waves of emotion at the interaction with something else, a person, a movie, a situation, they just they come up and then they go. Um,
well, and then there's and I don't know if this, it doesn't really seem like a contradiction,
Mhm.
but there is something, as you're saying all of that, and I'm listening to you, it brings to mind a video, one of Pernilla's videos, where she talks about how um, if you're still being, what's the word she used? I don't know if she said, I don't think she used the word triggered. Not that it matters too much, but in fact, she said something about not using the word trigger because no one can trigger you. I can't remember
Yeah.
exactly how she said it.
She uses the word activate more.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So she said, if you're still being activated, I wish I could remember how she said it exactly because it was really amusing. I think she said something like, if you're still being activated, honey, there's still work to be done.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I guess it's a little bit confusing about not being activated, but still having, like what you said, these weather patterns that move
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So when she's talking about activation, it's more of the reactive emotions that we have.
Okay.
So the like anger, for instance, like I said, you won't likely have anger because anger is a reaction against keeping you from feeling something that comes up. So you have an internal weakness where you feel like, people always think that you're wrong with everything that you do. And so you feel like you're wrong with everything that you do. And somebody criticizes you in some way, or you feel that you're being criticized in some way. And then you feel this contraction in the body and this, and then for some people, their method of alleviating that pain is to get really angry and blast out about it. So that's being activated because there's something underneath there. There's that belief, that core belief that is being poked. And then that's activating or triggering that the emotion, the reaction, the anger. When
Right.
she says that nobody else can trigger you, it's true. It's because again, it's your own issue that you are allowing to be pushed over and over again. If you don't have an issue where you have a lack of self-worth and somebody says you're really shitty at something, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get triggered by it. It doesn't matter what the other person tries to push. There's no button for them to hit. So there's no activation, there's no triggering of an emotion. There has to be a button in you that somebody else can activate. And then the actual reaction is coming out of you. Things like seeing a beautiful sunset and getting moved to tears by it
Uh,
isn't a reaction to something.
right.
Hearing a joke and you just burst out laughing isn't a reaction to that. There's no discomfort in the body that we are reacting against and trying to distract ourselves from. It's just this natural human thing that we do. I mean, your dogs do it too, right? Like you can see emotions in your dogs.
Mhm.
It's not that is like some sort of a weakness or some sort of a deficiency or something that needs to be worked through. We are emotional creatures, and that's perfectly normal. So if someone dies, it is normal to feel sad. It's okay to have this. I forget the specifics of it, but there was a famous Zen story where, um, was it Zen or Taoist? But I remember the monk or the master, he has a friend who dies and he's just sitting there crying. And the people are, oh, what are you doing? You're not supposed to cry, and he's like, I've lost my friend. I'm sad. I cry. It's like this is the way that it is. There's not making an extra story about it. It's not that I have this deep wound about my mortality and mortality in general and a fear of any of that. It's just there was a person here. I loved that person. They're not here. A sense of sorrow comes up and then it's just released and it's just allowed to be there without the I know better than this emotion. It shouldn't be there. Or, I can't feel this because that's Buddhas don't feel, whatever the whatever the hang up is an extra layer of self like repression. Like it's like creating this extra layer of self that believes that this kind of expression is not okay. And so as long as that is not that crying or that feeling of sadness isn't a reaction from something, that is the primary sensation that is there, and you're just with it. If you felt sad and then started like, okay, I'm not going to feel this. I'm just going to go like tidy up the house and I'm going to clean and I'm going to go do all this other stuff. All of those other things, the tidying up the house, the calling people, the getting on the phone, the socializing, the going for drinks, drinking, drugs, all that stuff, all of those ways, those are all the reactions to not feeling that sadness that's under there.
Yeah, and I think that's what he was getting at, was more what you're talking about. Not getting caught up in not just those stories, but also you notice that when I notice this anytime someone dies, and it's especially when it's someone who's fairly close in.
Yep.
Like Susanna, in the last couple of years, there have been various people that she's known at her job that have died.
Yep.
And the minute someone dies, and in a couple of cases, these were people who they were not nice people. They
Yep.
really weren't. I mean, one of them was just he was just a very mean, abusive person.
Mhm.
And so when these people have died, the next thing you know, all of a sudden everyone's telling these wonderful stories about them and how great they were, and all this total denial. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, just because he died doesn't mean we have to start lying to ourselves. You
I know.
know,
I
can't
know.
stand it. You
Yeah.
know, and that's the kind of thing that uh, that's the kind of thinking I have around the idea. Is it's one thing to have emotions in response to it. It's another thing to start telling yourself things that aren't true. And
Yeah.
I don't know what the purpose behind telling things about somebody that are not true when they were really somebody that was pretty much universally feared and loathed.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what purpose that serves, but obviously it serves some kind of purpose for those people. And it gets more back to that kind of social fabric that I just don't have any interest in being caught up in.
Yeah. I got that. It's a curious thing too, now that you bring it up. I don't know if I'm assuming there's some Christian sort of connection to that, because we have that thing, never speak ill of the dead. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's maybe because now they're everywhere, or because they're up there looking down and they can hear you. I'm guessing it has something to do with that, where it's like, I know that they're not in the room now because they're alive, but now that they're dead, they could be here with me. And so I have to be really careful about, I have a feeling it's something to do with that, but I don't know for sure. Or
Yeah, that's a pretty good thought. I mean, I can see how that would be the case.
or even I don't know. This is pure conjecture, but I don't know if there's like something where, because like in some of the Christian traditions, you have to, pray for the soul to, like, even after the person dies, even after they have supposedly, like, you have to pray for them for like a number of days before, so to make sure they get to heaven, but then you have to like pray for them for a bunch of days like after that to keep them there or something. Like there's something that I've never quite figured out, but I know like you have to have them, do masses at church and stuff to do that. And so I don't know if there's like some sort of um philosophy that, like, you have to only have like positive thoughts and prayers for the dead so that they remain in a good state. And so I don't know if there's like some sort of connection to a fear of what will happen to their soul if you speak ill of them. Again, pure conjecture, but I don't know.
Well, it sounds like God is sleeping on the job.
Well, I've never understood, and I've asked people, and I've never really gotten like a clear explanation as to why it is that, like, you have to pray for so long to get the person in, and then to kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert on those things. So,
Sounds like the ancient Egyptians in some ways.
well, it's fascinating, the similarity, because like in the was it in the like Orthodox Christian tradition, you have, I think it's 40 days. It takes like 40 days for the soul after you die to get to heaven. But ironically, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's like 40 days or something in the Bardo, before the
Ah,
rebirth. So we do have kind of a weird crossover between some of the religions as far as the after death process.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh. Well, no, I don't know if this is um, if this is a good time to kind of shift things because we started off with the things that I mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation. But I have been going through, and I'm finally almost finished going through the video from the 30th,
Amazing.
the Feder group,
Yeah.
and just all I'm doing is transcribing all of the stuff that strikes me as important or the suggestions that were made by you in
Wow.
just my hour of it. And in doing that, it's like, oh, that's Godfrey beating on the door. It's pages of me writing this stuff down.
Yeah.
So I can extract it and then simplify it and then just put it in a journal and like
Yeah.
here's suggestions. Here's a point of practice. Here's a point of inquiry, that kind of thing.
I love that.
And in doing so, I don't know how to talk about this without it sounding like I'm dwelling on being at a particular place with this work.
Mhm.
And if somebody said that to me, you or anyone else, I wouldn't be able to I wouldn't be able to counter that because it sounds that way, and it very well may be that. But there's kind of this sense of, I don't know, not really quite being adrift. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to describe this to you, but um, and I realize that there's some comparison in here, and it's not really comparison so much as it is. I hear people talk about this. It kind of creates a bit of a map, and um, um, so there's, I guess, this desire to kind of have a sense of feeling like things are really moving in a direction, but instead it feels kind of like just revisiting the same things over and over because in July there was that initial moment of seeing through the sense of self, but then finding out from talking to you that um, there are all these other forms of identification taking place, which was, I think, pretty much the entirety of our conversation on the 30th in the
Yeah.
Feder meeting. And then going back and listening to that and transcribing everything, starting to get a clear view of, good God, there's identification happening all over the place and in so many different ways, and some of it really subtle and some of it, more conspicuous. But instead of feeling like this is kind of been getting chipped away at, it just feels like kind of going in circles because, okay, one of the thoughts that comes up is, um, frequently when people do this, the, the classic take on it is first Feder goes, well, so do 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Well, I've spent since July, actually prior to July, but especially since July, um, just focusing on identification and first Feder. And as far as I can tell, Feders 2 and 3, I mean, that's not even up for discussion. I mean, that's sort of like, well, we'll get to that later. Right now, there's this first Feder. And so it just feels kind of like being, I don't like the way this sounds because this isn't really quite how it feels, but I don't know how else to say it. Kind of feel like I'm stuck in first Feder land, you
I
know?
hear you. I hear you. It's tricky, especially when we have the idea that 1, 2, and 3 are supposed to fall at once, because from what we see, the only way that that happens is if we're defining 2 and 3 in the very classical Buddhist sense of 2 is just doubt with the Dharma or doubt of your ability to do this. And then the idea is you see through the sense of self. So now, of course, you've lost doubt in whether the Dharma is true because you know from your own experience, you've recognized, oh, yes, of course, what he's saying is true. I've seen that's true. And there's no more doubt that I can do this. It's possible to become awakened. So 2 falls with it. And then 3 being the rites and rituals is like, praying to a certain deity or paying people in order to, get a more uh, favorable karma or something so that you might be able to lighten your load, or astrology, or, you know, bowing, doing prostrations for the sake of enlightenment, that sort of thing. You just recognize that you don't need to do any outside thing. No outside thing is having an effect on this because it's something that you have just done yourself, so to speak. There's your non-self, but that it's something which is entirely internal. It can entirely be done without the need for some other higher power, or intervening party to help out. So then that one falls with it. So if we're using that purely Buddhist context like that, then yes, the first three would fall together. The way Pranilla started doing it, and the way I've also found to be super, super useful, and so many other people, is to really expand the definition of two and three. And because they're things that eventually have to be worked with, excuse me, they have to be worked with, but they just tend to be kicked down the road by a lot of other practices. So two is not just the doubt in the practice, it's also all of the emotional doubt and all of the emotional, as we talk about the starting point, and the verbal indicators and all of this stuff that's underneath there, which is formulating our worldview, is all based off of this Fetter 2 issue. And ironically, there's a bit of a cycle between Fetter 1 and 2, especially
Hmm.
because Fetter Fetter 1 we look at as being all of the main identification, and Fetter 2 we think of just being the emotional stuff. But ironically, it's a lot of that emotional stuff. It's the old traumas and the old beliefs and not being good enough and all of that, which is actually keeping that first Fetter sense of self alive. It's that thing which is keeping you from fully being able to let go of that, because there's still this undercurrent of negative self-belief or lack of, you know, a lot of people have come in with, we have to develop a healthy, positive sense of self before we can fully let go of it. And a lot of people who have had traumatic upbringings, or who have had a lot of depression or stress or anxiety in their life, have never actually developed a functioning, healthy sense of ego or a healthy sense of self. And so that is keeping them from being able to have the security and the safety internally to know that they can let go of the feelings of self, the sort of safety net that we have, and be okay. And so it keeps them with this cycle of fear where you don't want to be able to get rid of the sense of self. You don't want to get rid of the sense of interiority. Like,
Hmm.
this is my safe space that I can retreat to my thoughts when everything is batshit crazy out there. I can always retreat inside my head. Or that, thoughts might be really, um, really chaotic and really awful, but at least that might have been the only thing that you had to cling to earlier in your life, is your thoughts. And so you just stick with them. And so you have to be able to have that sense of real grounded security and okayness and a feeling of being good enough before you can get rid of all of those safety nets of selfing. So that's why we see people bouncing back and forth. You've clearly seen through the first Fetter, right? You've clearly seen that there is no self anytime you look for it, that there
Right.
is just no feeling of self in many, many ways. You have had really clear experiences of where there's just nothing there, is self-wise. You've recognized that you are not your thoughts, that you are not synonymous with your body. You've broken all of these different parts of the emotional bondage, basically, that you have this, you've recognized that when these emotions come up, but they're not actually speaking about you. That's not that there's something there that is, completely synonymous with the emotions, that, like, instead of it being, I am sad, you just recognize that there's sadness coming up. And what is that? Oh, it's sensation in the eyes and it's feeling in the belly. And it's, it's that there's the difference in the emotional weather pattern coming through and the identification with that emotional weather pattern. So I would say it's raining outside. I wouldn't say I am raining, right? But there our traditional way of talking is I am really sad right now. I am angry. I am, feeling hostile and emotional. There's the identification. Sadness can come with no identification.
And I think that that's what you just said kind of touches on why you used a good word right at the beginning of what you were saying when you said interiority, because there is sort of this interior sense, or I heard Adyashanti once refer to it as being at the center, I think was how he said it. And so I'll notice that feeling because it's kind of a default sense.
Yeah.
It's and I noticed it years ago, and the way I talked about it based on my own experience of being able to see and feel it very clearly was I refer to it as the subtle ownership of experience.
I like that.
and, and that's really that to me really describes it with uncanny accuracy. I mean, that's really what that's how I experience it. It's like seeing something, and there's this weird sort of, and it happens in that place of interiority or being at center of I'm seeing something,
Yeah.
and the problem is it gets subtly reinforced all the time because we say I am frustrated or I see the sky is gray, and
Yeah.
that's and so I recognize that this stuff is happening, and sometimes frequently there's this mm, idea that this idea that um, being free from that, getting out from underneath that would um, feel much freer, much less um, like there's someone who is experiencing things.
Mm.
And that's recognizing, seeing that experience, seeing that it's happening, um, uh, is one of the things that seems to contribute to this sense of kind of always being wandering around in this same territory over and over and over again. But at the same time, I've heard people say things about that lead me to believe that that's actually something that gets addressed later on down the line in further fetters.
Yeah. I was just going to say it. It's more of what we deal with when we talk about like the interior feeling and that sort of thing. It's sort of split up between 6, 7, and 8,
Okay.
basically. So it's something that is definitely not a disqualifying factor for saying that Fetter 1 is pretty well taken care of. Um, but I know there's also some emotional stuff underneath there that can, you've been doing really good working with from the sounds of it. Um, but that is going to help clear up some more of those levels of identification that might be there in Fetter 1. And you know, it's so normal for people to have experiences of 6 and 7 and even 8 and then still find that, okay, we're back to level 1 now for for something, because something else will pop up that just needs to be seen. But that's why we're so adamant about saying that it's not that you're going back to first grade, it's that you're just seeing a deeper level of something that you weren't able to see before, because now more of this stuff is cleared up and now, oh, never felt that before, never saw that one. there's a level.
Okay.
So don't get hung up on that. Just, work with what is coming up and then let that be the place that you're working with. Because there's an issue where if we get hung up on the idea that I am currently stuck at Fetter One, that is right there creating a you who is able to move back and forth up a ladder and is consistently in one place. If you are feeling identified with level one or Fetter One at this point, in that moment, in this particular iteration, there is a Fetter One lens in effect, right? There's this feeling of being a self that is here right now. If 5 minutes from now, all of a sudden everything collapses and it's two-dimensional and you don't feel like a self at all, you don't feel like there's even anything separate from the wall over there, it's just sight appearing, that is a Fetter 6 experience. That is Fetter 6 lens has been let go of. In that moment, that is the way that the body, mind, organism, and everything is expressing or appearing. But it doesn't mean that there is a you who is now sixth Fetter you, or ready to work on the seventh Fetter you. It's just this temporary appearance. And so holding it so lightly that it doesn't matter that as long as there's an idea that I have crossed a fetter, I have broken a fetter, I have gotten past this and can never go back there again, just indicates this sense of a permanent self who is able to learn something, fix something, be better at something.
Okay. I
Is
need to remember that. I mean, because that's hearing you say that, I recognize that that is what's happening for me in those moments.
yeah,
Um, and hearing you say that, I realize it's also really easy to step away from that if that can be recognized.
absolutely.
And it would be much more beneficial to instead appreciate the fact that the things that I was describing to you at the beginning of this conversation, that those things are happening. That's going to be much more beneficial to be able to recognize that feelings and emotions are being seen through, and the things that I described as currently beginning to happen. You
Yeah,
know, and they should be appreciated. Because
absolutely.
I mean, regardless of everything that has been seen through over the last however many years, when that happened in driving to the hospital the other day, with seeing that there wasn't really sadness, there was just this sensation in the eyes, and
Hmm.
everything else gets built on that foundation. Seeing that so clearly, I mean, it was a very, very visceral experience. I mean, it really had some weight to it.
Yeah,
That was something that was new. That was new. That was not something I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. I mean, I'm sure I've seen emotions and feelings come and go many times, and seen that they're not owned by anybody. It's just coming and going.
yeah,
But that, the way it happened was,
huge.
yeah, it was really something significant.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's wonderful. But notice that negativity bias that we have, that it's like whatever good thing we have, we kind of like, yeah, okay, but it was just that. What I really want is this other bigger thing that, it's this shiny object that I don't have right now, but what I do have, it's fine. But so it's always that downplaying of the insights and yeah, okay, but I'm still not, no, no, no. Be really grateful and present with what is,
Yeah. Well, that definitely needs to be appreciated, and to be recalled from time to time.
of
You know,
course. Yeah.
hey, that was great. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And it actually brings up two I had wanted to mention before when we were going through the sort of expectations that may or may not happen. And when you brought up the sixth fetter and like the one woman whose vision went 2D and then hasn't gone back,
Right.
um, there are people who say that that has been their experience, that it doesn't go back. Other people say that, it kind of goes 2.5D, or some people it just goes right back to 3D. And it could
Right.
be something where you flip back and forth. And some people never have that experience at all, but still see through the sixth fetter, but just don't have a visual component to it like that.
Right.
So it is up for everybody. But I, my inclination is because of the way a lot of this stuff seems to be from the neuroscience as it's currently being developed, it really sounds like it's probably something where part of the default mode network or some other part of the brain is being that is doing that is being deregulated as we do this kind of work. And like for instance, Pernilla, she had what 11, almost 12 years ago, she had a brain injury. And there was a period where she was completely 2D from the brain injury. Her brain was not able to create that third dimension on things. So it was
Huh.
very difficult to walk downstairs and do things like that because everything was flat. She couldn't tell if there was like I think like a hole in the ground or like a shadow or something. It was you couldn't tell what was there. So of course it was super difficult to walk. And thankfully, she got three-dimensional vision back because it's so much easier to live with.
Right.
It's just, but that's something where we would look at that and say, oh, somebody's got two-dimensional vision. They're, past the sixth fetter. That's amazing. But it can also be done by a brain injury, so we have to watch the value that we put into these things. Um,
Yeah.
so what's important about the sixth fetter thing is recognizing that there is no subject here separate from anything else. Any experiences that you have, whether it's weird visual aberrations or anything else, is secondary to the actual experience of the lack of identification of a centralized self here separate from everything else. It's more of they're good pointers, and they are things which for oftentimes for people, even just right in the moment, if you have this kind of loosening of this subject feeling, this sort of internal feeling of spaciousness of where there's a person here and there's a sense of space between that and something else, when that loosens, again, we don't know why, but something seems to change often where the visual field does suddenly come like really close and maybe get really flat and that sort of thing. And there's some connection between that feeling of internal subject and a spatial overlay and this sort of visual perception that we have. But I can't say why that happens. So I think that's why it's kind of different for everybody.
Hmm.
It's
Okay.
just something consistent enough that, people describe it and experience something like that.
Hmm. Can't say I'd really care to have that happen to me.
I mean, in small doses, it's great. It's perfectly fine because you start to recognize that things aren't it, like it's not that from okay, a good point, right? So right now it looks like that ohm symbol on the wall is behind me, right? Like
Yeah.
would ohm symbol, you would assume that like I would go and point. Wait, I can't. There it is. So if you see a hand pointing like that, it there we go. It looks like it's pointing far away at something that's much further away, right? But your actual experience of it, God, that's so hard to do. It's all reversed. What is actually being seen right there is a pretty good size ohm symbol with a tiny little hand and a weirdly perspective, this weird perspective arm that's at a distance, but the entire thing is being seen on your screen, which is two-dimensional, right?
Right.
So like this to this, the brain creates a sense of distance and says that there is something that is moving from back to front, but it's just a
Right.
little tiny hand getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger on a two-dimensional screen. And if I was looking at that from, well, okay, I can't see it literally because it's behind me, but from where I'm looking at me on the screen, this does not make sense in this view. In if I was looking at something in front of me, right, that you can't see because it's behind the computer right now, And there's a feeling that I'm here and it's across the room. If I said I was going to draw a line between me, the subject, and that wall over there, I would normally say it's like this, right? It goes out across the room. But what we're actually seeing, if you look in your visual field as it actually is, you have a wall in front of you and something midway up on the wall. Your view is not really from here out to it. It's actually straight up. Whatever's showing up in your field of vision right now is just right here, right? Like here.
Yeah.
If you have a point here that seems to be on a wall out here, the idea is to draw a line from here to see it. But actually, it's appearing right here. So all you're actually doing is drawing a line from here to here. It's on a flat plane going up. I, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, I do.
So it's this perspective of distance, which is this artificial overlay on our visual field. There is no distance the way we perceive it from here to there. It's just boop, 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 straight up from wherever we're taking our perspective of vision from being. But all of that kind of happens naturally when you investigate that sense of a subject, and that falls away. All of a sudden, everything becomes two-dimensional, flat, and very close in that way that there is no feeling of distance between being a subject looking at a screen in front of you like you're sitting in a movie theater. It's just a screen with nothing watching it.
Yeah, and that it all makes sense. And I never really connected it to the whole thing about 2D vision, but I remember hearing someone say a few years ago that we infer depth.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do.
And I was like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. I didn't
Yeah.
have any problem with that.
But this is where we go from it being a logical, yeah, okay, that totally makes sense, to this actual experience of, oh yeah, like everything is literally right here. Like there is no question that there is no depth to it. So yeah. So
Well, the experience sounds like it would probably feel claustrophobic to some degree.
it would if there was a self in there who was boxed in, but that's the point.
Good point.
There's no claustrophobia because all of a sudden that is the only thing that's there and it's not in anything else. And there's
Huh.
nothing else being boxed in or close to it.
Huh.
It's just what is here. It's just things appearing as they appear.
Okay. Hmm.
But don't get hung up on that at this point.
No,
It's
I'm
just
not.
the little things to just throw out and see because everybody has experienced this at some point, even if it was when you were a very little child before this sort of sense got developed. There was a
Hmm.
period when we all kind of saw like this, and
Huh.
it's
Yeah.
going back to that. So there's often a type of recognition when people hear this. It's like, I do kind of know what you're talking about. I've kind of maybe
Huh.
experienced that before. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, no, I really don't spend any time dwelling on that. I mean, the place where my mind has been it was more what I was telling you about, feeling like I've been kind of just wandering around this same terrain over and over and over again. But having said that, there was something else I wanted to get your input on because, okay, so like I mentioned, I'm going through that whole hour from the 30th of January. And I'm trying to find a way, and that's part of the reason for writing all of this down and then having gotten a journal to put it all in so that I can distill it and take something that's many pages and turn it into maybe a page or two so that one, you walk away and that's a page or two and you remember a good chunk of that. If you don't, you can always come back to it and there's a page or two you can quickly review it.
Yeah.
So, you know, um, there's been inquiry into feelings and emotions and um, what was the other one? There's another one that comes up fairly regularly. And all of this stuff is happening as I'm going through the business of just daily living.
Hmm.
But in going through that 1 hour, I mean, you'd think, well, it's an hour. Yeah, an hour is a little bit long, but there was so much information in there. And as I'm writing it, the thing that kept coming up over and over and over again was, there's got to be a way to simplify this. There's got to be a way to make this, reduce it enough that I can keep it on hand mentally and eventually get in the habit of remembering to ask these questions and investigate into these things as they're coming up in real time. Like one of the conversations towards the end of that hour, you were talking about, there had been this thing that happened between my daughter and I, and she'd gotten really upset. And well, why is it that's upsetting you? Why can't she just be upset and acting childish, and you'd be perfectly okay with that? So I think I'm saying too much. I think I'm overcomplicating it, but the idea is trying to find a way to simplify the inquiry and the investigation so that, I know why I would mention that, because you're talking about when that happens, when she gets upset, being able to, in that moment, feel what's going on in the body and look into that. Why is that a problem?
Hmm.
And so trying to keep all of this stuff on hand is, right now at least, I mean, once I'm done with all the writing, it may change, but right now it's kind of tricky.
Yeah, I guess that.
And I'm not the only one doing this. You've done this. You've done a lot of it, obviously, and so with Pernilla and all the people watching these videos, and so obviously there's a way to make this manageable so that we can do it in real time, which seems to be where it's most beneficial and we get the greatest result from it.
Yeah.
But I find myself struggling with that.
I think part of it is, and I love the fact that you're doing all of this and trying to go through and distill it down. I think it's brilliant. I think actually it'd be super helpful if more people did that sort of thing, because there is so much information going around and we have so many experiences, but we don't, it's like, okay, I'll take a little bit of this one and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And then, it just all kind of becomes a bit of a wash. So I think it's useful to like really kind of try to bring it down to what works for you, what resonates with you, and then how are you gonna make it work. Um, for the one that you mentioned, like, with your daughter in that situation, I think the fundamental, if we wanted to put it in like a one or two sentence takeaway for that, is that it's you were in that moment wanting something which was not the case. You were imagining an alternate view of what might have happened, and there was a resistance to the fact that that was not lining up with reality.
I was going to say I was arguing with reality is how I think about it.
Exactly right. You were. And so in that moment, to recognize, okay, her being the 16-year-old who I think a 16-year-old should be, and her acting the way that I want her to act is not currently happening right now. This is what is happening. And then feeling into the body, like you said, so immediately recognize, okay, this is what is happening. If it feels like there's a resistance to that happening, into the body and see, is there some sort of turmoil going on? Is there some tension? Is there something there that feels like this is not okay? And I have to in some way retaliate back, like what happened.
Right.
That retaliation is coming out of this feeling of just not feeling like you could be in the body. You couldn't be with what was going on in that moment. And so the way to do that is to get out of it by putting it on her. It's something where I'm going to create an ultimatum where you have to change your behavior so that I don't have to continue feeling the way that I do right now.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's recognizing what is happening in the body right now. And that's the first primary thing, is just, can you be with what is there right now? You don't have to do in that moment a deep inquiry into, well, why do I feel like that? And why do I just can you be in the body and recognize that it's actually okay to be in a situation where your daughter is acting a certain way? It has created a feeling of turbulence in you that you don't like, but can you just be there with that turbulence?
So it seems like a good, simple formula for having on hand when just moving through life is learning. Okay, you start over again. The formula would be something like um, there's a reaction, there's some sort of resistance. That's the time to wake up.
Yeah, that's a really good formula. Yeah, that's a really good formula. As soon as you see that resistance happening, bring it back into the body, feel what that resistance is in response to, because most likely the sensation in the body, this sensation in the body is not that big of a deal, but
Yeah.
our reaction to it is way out of proportion to the actual sensation that's there. So it's learning that, oh, what's here is just this. I don't have to yell and give an ultimatum and make the other person feel bad in some way or whatever. I can live with that. That's not a big deal. Then when you are out of the situation, then you can go, all right, so wait a minute. Why did her not behaving the way I expected her to behave make that happen in the first place? What is that saying about me? What is there in me that needed her to behave a certain way in order for me to not have that come up? Is it is it saying something about me as a parent? Is it saying something about me and my beliefs of the way that a person should behave in a certain situation? Is it, you know, the good thing to do there is to use the bubble of reality thing and turn it around on yourself. So if if you seem to get angry because um she was being dismissive of you and not doing what you want. Okay, so are you being dismissive of you? Are you not looking at your own needs? Are you not listening to yourself in the way that she was reflecting back at you?
Wow. I really need to review that bubble of reality video then too, because
Yeah.
I think the message over the intervening months since the time I watched it has become kind of garbled
Okay.
because I didn't really remember it like that. So okay,
There,
well
there are some different aspects to it, but that's one of the ones that is really potent to finding out if you feel like you are being triggered by somebody else. It's whatever it is that you have a problem with them, you got a problem with you. If you feel like somebody else is judging you in a certain way or criticizing or pointing out, or if you find that you are pointing out somebody else's imperfections, you probably have those imperfections in yourself. There's something in you that that is related to. And so you need to take a look inward and see what you're pointing to.
okay, so it sounds like what I heard you saying at one point was if say if somebody is judgmental towards me,
Mhm.
that's pointing towards the idea that I'm probably pretty judgmental of myself.
And also possibly towards other people. Like, man, that person is such a judgmental ass. They're horrible. Okay, well, you just judge them for being judgmental, first of all. And and then you can look inside to both. So check both because both may or may not be true for you. It could be one or the other or both, that I'm
Ah,
super judgmental of myself and so there's this internal harshness. And it could also be that I'm judging other people as a way of not recognizing the fact that I'm also the worst judge on myself. And there's so much self-hatred and anger in there that I'm not willing to look at. So I'll look at all the problems with you and let me judge you and tell you all the things that you need to fix.
well, it's interesting that this is what the example that comes up because um, the I don't want to say relationship, the state of affairs between um, us and a couple of our neighbors. Um, and unless it's necessary, just for the sake of time, I won't get into the whole backstory. But they, shortly after we moved in, um, they attempted to get to know us, and
Mm.
it very quickly turned into a case of they came to their conclusions about us, and that was that. And so we're not that I care too much, but uh, they, I guess I could say that they kind of see us like the Adams family, you know, and so in the intervening years, there's always been or frequently been this sense of frustration, kind of being galled by the fact that they've judged us without even finding out who we were. And so and it never occurred to me until now, this conversation, to ask the question, well, why am I troubled by the fact that they're judging us?
Yeah.
You know, so what's going on there? And now you're saying it, it makes it really obvious that that does point back this way.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And while we're on that subject, I didn't want to leave that other one so quickly because when I said about the dismissing, your daughter seeming to be dismissing of you and perhaps you also dismissing yourself, I do want to reference or, kind of refer back again because I know we've talked about in the past this issue of feeling like you're maybe putting your needs behind others or this sort of feeling of I really want to bring back again that boundary issue, that it's that need for healthy boundaries. And if you feel like you are dismissing yourself, there's this feeling of you not honoring your own boundaries.
I sort of understand what you're saying, but I'm not entirely clear on it. What exactly do you mean?
So if it feels like you're doing things that you are not fully comfortable doing, like you have this kind of idea that, okay, well, if you have this idea of an sort of outer boundary where I'm comfortable doing things up to a point, and then if I get pushed beyond that, it's uncomfortable. But sometimes we can push ourselves beyond that. So you'll know if we've talked about like issues of having duties around the house and that sort of thing.
Right?
So you might get to the point where it feels like, you know what, I feel like this is too much. I feel like I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I'm not being respected. The things that I say, if I say that I'm asking for that if I say that this is um too much, people aren't hearing me. But so
Mm.
I'm going to just keep overextending myself. I'm just going to keep doing it anyway. If somebody asks me to do something, I don't feel like it, I'm exhausted, but I'm going to go and do it anyway because they asked me to do it and I'm a good guy and that's what we do. So if you're doing that, you're pushing past your boundary. You know what is comfortable, but it's constantly being sort of squished in and in and in so that your comfort line just keeps getting smaller and smaller.
Okay.
And you keep doing it to yourself as well in these situations because you're kind of becoming complicit in it.
Okay. All right.
So
So now I understand you. So,
So
but
so it's talking about, if you have that feeling of maybe if it resonates that you might be dismissing yourself, it's that you're putting your own needs a little bit too far to the back. You know what you need. Maybe you're tired and you're not going to bed early enough, or not
mm,
healthy enough foods, or asking for help when you need it, or saying, you know what, I really have to do this another time because this is just too much right now. If you feel like you are dismissing yourself, there is this recognition that you are pushing past your own needs and your own boundaries.
so what you're asking me to be aware of, try to sum that up as simply as you can.
Yeah. So throughout your days, figure out, or not figure out, but feel into if you are feeling like an internal wall where it's like you're at sort of your limit. It's like, this is where I'm comfortable. Okay, now I'm getting to the point where I'm really tired, where this is one thing too many. This is something beyond what I'm morally comfortable doing. it can come in all different sorts of guises, but it's like we have this boundary of this is where I'm comfortable. Beyond that, I'm not. But then if you find yourself sort of being pushed past that and going, okay, well, I'll do it just this one time, or yeah, all right, I'll give in. No, I really have all this work to do. I shouldn't go to bed right now, even though I'm exhausted. I'll stay up and do that thing. If you're finding yourself doing that sort of a thing, it's a little flag going up and saying, hey, you know, this needs to be looked at because this is not sustainable.
So it sounds like you're saying know when to say when.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really easier way of summing it up.
Okay.
And being really clear for yourself on what that is. If you have a lifelong history of not really having a clear boundary where you really know what you're comfortable with, then it can actually take some practice to kind of figure out, am I overextending is what I take to be my normal sense of a boundary actually already overextending myself?
Hmm. Well, one thing that Susanna and other people who've known me for any length of time have commented on is that I was always very good about setting boundaries and being really firm about it,
Yeah.
and not going past that point. But in recent years, between having a kid and then Susanna's health taking a turn, things changed, and what was once just, I guess, a fairly conventional, or not conventional, um, fairly standard role in terms of somebody who's responsible for all the household stuff, wound up getting kind of pushed into a place where there's more of what you're describing. It kind of grew into that, and this sense of commitment and not duty. What am I looking for? The sense of commitment and I can't think of what the word is for it, but this sense of standing by someone and doing right by them um, created a climate where the kinds of things you're describing became day in, day out occurrences. And it happened in such a way that it didn't even realize it until it had been going on for a while. And it was a case of, well, I'm drowning here.
Yeah.
You know, so fortunately, that's and between Susanna and I, that's getting corrected.
Good.
But there are still some other things around that are not more. They're not really about domestic stuff. I don't know how to talk about them succinctly, but it's more emotional, psychological stuff, and so that stuff's a little trickier because it's not. It's not as obvious because it's not happening. It's not happening out in space time in a way that's conspicuous. You know.
So it's an internal feeling of how would you describe that how are you experiencing it when you recognize that it's there, that it even exists?
Let me try to give you an example.
Mhm.
We've had an ongoing situation that's had its ups and downs. But at one point in time, heated's not the right word, but it was something that had a lot of a charge to it.
Yeah.
Regarding our daughter and her boyfriend, and the way that Susanna felt about it, the way she saw it, the way I felt about it, the way I saw it. And so frequently I felt like I was really given no choice. I was just kind of cornered into having to go along with things. And the way that I could recognize that was happening was that I would feel powerless. I felt like I had been completely robbed of any ability to say, I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't feel like this is right.
Yep.
And have have anyone in the house actually understand or honor that. So I was left just, again, the only word I can think of is powerless.
Yeah.
Just, well, this is what's happening and I got to go along with it. I either make my peace with it or I resist it and feel miserable.
So how did you end up working with that? Because it's a great example of it.
Well, considering that so much of the time I was left feeling powerless, um, and there were other things going on in our house too that were um, things that I could not really do anything about. And so what occurred to me, I guess it was about a year ago or so, was that um, it seems like in reality, so much of the time that we really are truly powerless. Life goes the way life is going to go. And this idea that we can do something about it is something that really, there's not a lot of truth in that.
No.
Yeah, I mean, people believe that we can control and manage things, and that's, it's becoming more evident that that's kind of a delusion and
Mhm.
delusion as well. And so I thought, well, here's an opportunity to learn how to let go. And so I've just gradually worked on learning to let go and to without a sense of resignation, without a sense of any kind of upset or hurt. And it took a while to get to that. Over and over and over again, these things would come up. Like, okay, I'm just going to let go. I'm going to step out of the management business and let this take its own course. And over time, I've gotten better and better at it.
Amazing. Uh, Again, slight caveat there. Because
I,
huh?
I didn't catch that very last thing you said.
Oh, I just said a slight caveat there.
Okay.
Um, because again, I agree. Fundamentally, yes, there is absolutely we have no control over anything, and we are absolutely powerless towards everything, right? So that is absolutely true. Um, in the terms though, where we're talking about this sort of necessary feeling of having a boundary that we can actually defend and honor and respect, there can be a danger in if it's a situation like that, pushing past it by just sort of doing the bypassing of, okay, well, I know I'm doing something that I really don't want to do, but if I kind of desensitize myself to it and just resign and let go, that can be, the way that people deal with really awful slave situations and stuff. We can kind of use that to cope with anything without actually having the sort of healthy boundaries in place that are necessary for living you know a balanced life outside of the non-dual world. So we do have to watch that that's not just a coping mechanism to to survive. Um, Given that you have had good boundaries in the past, it can be a useful thing to kind of, what it's a fine line with what we do with like the Fetter 5 aversion stuff, where we are on one hand getting to the point where we go, okay, I'm accepting what is here now and that it is not lining up to my preferred choice of reality. And can I be okay with that? Because again, it comes down to arguing with reality. So, on one hand, we are doing exactly that sort of thing to say, well, how am I feeling the resistance to this thing? Is that having any sort of effect on the situation? My feeling a sense of resistance to this does not change it at all.
Right.
And then uh seeing, if I need to hold on to any of that. And then if that goes, that's wonderful. But where we do stop short is we don't do that just so that we can become a doormat and never have to say no to anybody or to have any sort of healthy boundary in our life. And it is um, a subtle gradation between being um, completely equanimous with everything that is happening, and you can just say, okay, and being a complete doormat. The difference is when you are equanimous with something that's happening, there's no resistance to it, but it doesn't mean that you can't, and again, this is still using kind of dualistic language, that you can't do something to change the situation. So if somebody I think like a decent example for this, if somebody is abusive in your household, you have somebody who is constantly, say you have a spouse and it's a turbulent abusive kind of relationship. We don't do this so that we can just continue to be abused in the relationship without having any suffering.
Right.
It's recognizing in the moment that I don't need to be triggered into playing out this story. I don't need to be, if somebody says something about me, I recognize that A, it's about them. I don't feel the reaction to it that I once felt before, but I can still file for divorce and get out of the situation. You don't have to be stuck in a bad situation just because
Right.
you're okay being in that situation. It's a handy tool to have to not be battered by the winds of reactivity. But if it comes to being in a problematic situation, you can still leave. You can still do something about it.
Yeah, and there's definitely a line in terms of what's too much,
Yeah.
and I have a pretty clear sense of what too much is. Unfortunately, none of those things have shown up.
Okay.
Uh,
Good.
I mean, it's one thing to say, well, your daughter's involved with this kid, and this thing between the two of them is really very dysfunctional, and there's a lot of really unhealthy stuff going on here. Or what was another one? Oh, the way my daughter was eating for the longest time. I mean, she was just eating day in and day out, just junk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, um, you don't want that, but that's not something that, to use that phrase that people use, that's not a deal breaker.
Yep.
Um, so, and the interesting thing is that in both of those situations, by letting go and stepping away from it and taking the attitude of, this is whatever this thing is that we're all
Yeah.
present in. This thing, it goes its own way.
Yeah.
It works however it works, and it does things the way it does them, and you know how that functions is pretty much beyond anyone's ability to understand. And so I can't, I don't know how it works. All I know is it does. So best thing I can do is let it do what it does and get out of the way. Just go with, that phrase, go with the flow. Interesting thing is, in doing so, both of these situations have, the thing with the boyfriend is in the process of resolving itself. The thing with
Nice.
her diet did resolve itself.
Amazing.
It completely took care of itself. And it was really entertaining to watch the whole thing happen.
That's amazing. That's really, really good. So yeah, that oftentimes will be the case. If you find that there's a situation where that's not happening, though, where, again, if you were in a situation that was a dire kind of a thing or something that's really serious and it's not something that you can just step back from, and because you're somehow otherwise involved in it, without having the reactivity, it allows you to then have this kind of clear-headed seeing of what needs to be done in order
Right.
to do that thing. because you're not coming at it from that place of reactivity, of feeling like, well, I deserve to be in this relationship because I'm, a terrible person and this is the best I can do, or, whatever the thing is that makes you feel like a victim, or like you uh can't do anything otherwise, or that, you get sucked into like a cycle of drama and just kind of thrive on this reactivity. Without that, you can have this kind of clear perspective. Oh, no, no, this is unhealthy. I need to do this, 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 and this in order to extract myself from the situation and then make that happen. So there are two ways to look at it, and that one is definitely more from the sort of dual angle of where we are still talking about having doership and ability to control and that sort of thing. And I think it's helpful to talk on both levels sometimes. Yes, ultimately, there is nobody there in that situation who is able to control or do anything else, and nobody to suffer or anything else. But um, that's something that can just be used as a bypassing tool to keep somebody in a really shitty place and suffering unnecessarily. And so I'm reluctant in those situations to just use that kind of language.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're talking about what the examples you're giving, someone being abused, hurt, mistreated, that kind of thing. I mean, regardless of which level you want to talk about it from, I mean, that's always, and I cannot imagine it ever changing. Those are always situations that are untenable. I
Mm.
mean, it's interesting because the thing with my daughter and her boyfriend actually veers kind of close to that because he hit her once.
Oh wow, yeah,
Um,
yep.
but fortunately, it hasn't happened again, at least as far as we know. But he does things like he tries to manage her time.
Mm.
He tries to manage who, like, you know, her ability to have friends, or you know, he'll lecture her, and my daughter even admitted it recently that the way he lectures her, it's a pretty much a daily occurrence, and it causes her to feel really unhappy.
Mm.
And on one hand, I wish I could just put an end to it,
Yeah.
but the way things are, the way this whole thing is developed, trying to just put an end to it actually winds up creating other problems.
Yeah.
Um, Now, if he was hitting her, you can be guaranteed. I mean, if that was continuing going, my wife and I would both just, done.
Yeah.
Going to a different school, whatever. Um, and things have started to quiet down, even though it's still obviously not a great situation. But things have shown up in recent weeks. Looks like it's on the verge of taking care of itself.
Good.
So, my point in mentioning that is to say that that gets close to being an example of what you're talking about.
Mm.
And I was really very much of the mind at one point of we've got to stop this.
Yeah,
We've
absolutely.
got to put an end to this. This cannot continue. Um, my wife wasn't comfortable with that. She told me why. And when Susanna explained, well, we do that, then what we do is we wind up creating two people who see themselves as victims. That only reinforces this idea, and that creates more of the situation of pitting them against us. Like, okay, I see your point.
Yes,
And
yes.
recognize you're going to have to let this play out. Yeah. And so in doing so, it looks like if things go the way they look like they're going, it looks like it's going to
Good.
resolve itself. So
Good.
all that to say is, I still recognize when something is inappropriate, something is too much, and I'm willing to say that.
Good. And it can also be, even though it sounds very obvious when it's a situation of abuse or something like that, it can be something as subtle as just not going to bed when you need to. And not listening to your own body, in terms of its biological needs, that um we can constantly be pushed past our limit. And that is also untenable, even though it seems at the time, oh, it's fine. I can live on, 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep. That's fine. It'll be all right. But it mounts up and it does have consequences. So even those things, if it feels like you're constantly pushing past where you need to be on that realm, that's when you can also, from that clear-headed, non-reactive perspective, say, you know what? Actually, it's true. I do need to start going to bed when I'm tired and not when I feel like all of my obligations say that it's okay, or whatever else is happening. Or my addictions to Netflix, that can also be a thing too, where it's like, well, I know I'm tired, but I'm just gonna stay up and watch one more episode, that sort of.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. So fourth fetter, but there we go. So
So there was one other, I don't know if I'll be able to recall it now. There's something we were in the flow of conversation, something kind of popped up and saying, oh yeah, need to mention that. And now I really can't recall it clearly. So, oh well.
if you think of it, send me an email.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to pop up later tonight. So
Yeah.
I'll mention it to you then. So, but anyway, well, uh, you're talking about the issue of sleep, and that's actually been the case for me this week. So partly because of not going to sleep when I need to, but also because of the fact that it was hard to sleep when I was the only one in the bed. I mean, the dogs are great company, but when your wife's in the hospital,
I guess that.
yeah, so so I'm a little fuzzy around the edges, and there was something that I wanted to kind of say in summation about all of this, and now it's gone. All right, well, whatever.
I respect that. But if it comes up, let me know. But we covered a lot, so there's a lot to sum up as well.
Yeah, well, that's the way it is with all of these, both of these and the ones with Kristen and Kaiser.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty high density.
Yeah, we do pack a lot into a couple hours.
Um, yeah. So, I don't spend as much time dwelling on things like later fetters or how things are supposed to be or how they might transpire, as much as it sounds like from what I said earlier. In fact, I more often than not intentionally just when that stuff when those thoughts come up, just set them aside
Yeah, good.
because they can they can be detrimental. But as far as the work with the first fetter and 2 and 3, I guess what I'm wondering is setting aside and this is with the idea of trying to find a way of wrapping up.
Yeah.
I this has given me a way of understanding, thinking about dealing with, or working with Fetter One, and the fact that it seems to be something that takes a lot of continually looking and looking and looking again.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, I understand why. I mean, just in the doing it, it reveals itself. It reveals the necessity.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is how, and I kind of do after what you said about the second fetter and the relationship between the first fetter. Although I have some idea, it's not entirely clear at this point. So what do we say in terms, or how do we understand where fetters 2 and 3 come into play with all of this, the way things are currently. Um, oh, I didn't realize she'd moved. Um, how do we? What do we say about that? How do we understand that? I mean, do we just say, okay, set fetters 2 and 3 will take care of themselves if we keep doing the work that we're doing that's addressing an identification? Or, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want to get ahead of myself, but at the same time, I also don't have any idea how fetters 2 and 3 fit into the scheme. I'm going to pick it up.
Yeah.
There you go. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if that hurt you.
Poor girl.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question. So we call the first 3 fetters the foundational fetters. And I think it's really helpful to look at them all kind of at the same time. It's not the hierarchy of I have to work with 1 and then 2 and then 3. There are 3 things that are all basically, it's almost like a triangle. So you have the first fetter with all of its different types of identification that we think of in the gross levels of identification. But then the fetter 2 is your emotional identification, which is, again, it's the things about me, of me being a shameful person, a guilty person, a very fearful person. The things where I have this first fetter, we talk about a lot of the narrative stuff, but the second fetter is really where that narrative has some hooks. It's like,
Oh, that makes sense.
good. Yeah. So, I remember this time when I was 5 and this happened. Okay. But I remember when I was 5 and this happened, and I realized then that I am just this terrible human being, or I was embarrassed in front of the whole school. And now I felt that, and I still remember that. So that's giving that first fetter identity, it's hooks. It's giving that the
Right, how they support and feed each other.
exactly. And then the third fetter is all of the things that we do to keep from feeling the emotional turbulence of fetter 2. So it's like if I feel like I am really ashamed of myself and I'm gonna go like I'm a shameful person. Now, in my particular case, I feel like the reason that I'm shameful is because I have 20 extra pounds of fat on my stomach. So I'm gonna use doesn't matter. Everybody has a thing, but it's like you're going to point to whatever that thing is that you're going to put as the reason why you are shameful. It might be that I'm shameful because I'm addicted to a drug or an alcohol. I'm shameful because I'm too overweight. I'm shameful because, I'm not good enough at my job, whatever it is. So you take that thing and we do something to try to distract from that. And so the third fetters, the rites and rituals, the habits that we have. So if my thing is I feel shameful, and the reason for that is because I am 20 pounds of fat on me, I'm going to start dieting and exercising for the purpose of trying to get rid of that feeling of shame. If I lose that weight, now I'm not going to be shameful anymore. Well, that's not true. The root of shame
Right.
is still underneath there. You're just going to find something else to blame if that 20 pounds is gone. So then I'm going to blame, well, I'm shameful because I'm alone. I should be in a relationship. So then third fetter, you're going to go and join a dating site so you can meet somebody who tries to, to prove to yourself that you're not really the shameful thing of fetter 2. And so you're constantly doing something to try to fix that sense. And all of that is still tying together this sense of identification. So
Right.
it's really just a triangle that's self-supporting.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was thinking about that analogy that people give about the three-legged stool. So,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we kind of work on it all at the same time because it's all interrelated.
okay. I'm glad that I asked because that couldn't have been any more unclear. And I mean, it was just, I couldn't even begin to get even the most foggy, unclear outlines of any framework for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just first fetter, and then well, there are these other two, And it's not that I'm not familiar with them. I know of them by name from from all of the ancient Buddhist stuff. But
Of course.
um, the funny thing about it is that um, that changes my understanding of the third fetter. Because while I don't think about it in the strictly classic sense,
Yep.
um, I did have a way of understanding it, but it wasn't a way that was really all that helpful. A little bit, but not
Yeah.
as helpful as understanding it the way you just described
Amazing.
it. So
Good.
that's great.
Amazing. Amazing. So you can be aware all throughout your day. Anything that time that feels like you're doing something for a purpose. That's third fetter.
Ah,
I'm
okay.
doing, I'm doing, I'm practicing guitar and I'm doing scales. I hate doing scales, but I'm doing them so I can be better at doing something else. Okay, well, you notice the ulterior motive behind it. It's all to reinforce this. I'm going to get something out of this. And which, again, doing something for a purpose, third fetter, is reinforcing this I who is going to get something better out of it once I get this thing. I am going to be better, which just reinforces the first fetter.
Right. I was going to say it all shores up the I entity.
Yeah, exactly. So
And
big old triangle.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's great. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, I am too. I am too. That was a really, I don't think I would have said it that way if you hadn't asked that. So I've actually never described it as a triangle before. That was like a new thing, but it just, when you describe it, I was like, that makes the most sense in how to describe this. So thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, that was mutually beneficial because I,
Yeah.
I really had, like I said, I didn't have any kind of understanding that it all was even remotely close to clear. So, all right. Well, that's great.
I'm happy about that then. Anything else before we wrap up then?
No, I've got that one thing that I can't seem to recall, but when it pops up, I'll just send you an email about it.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Well, great.
good luck to Susanna and Sweetie there, and hopefully everybody is healthy and on the mend, and you'll get some sleep.
Yeah, starting to. Last night was better than a few nights before. So,
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad. Oh, I, I know, but hang in there, and use this anytime that there's any resistance feelings coming up. This is all really good inquiry fodder.
right. Okay. Well, um, kind of along the lines of what I said earlier when I kind of condensed that one idea down to a formula of, when there's a reaction or resistance, that's the time to wake up.
Yeah.
There's some more things along those lines in that one video that I've been working my way through, and that will all make what you were just saying possible. So, or
Amazing.
at least much easier, much more doable.
Good.
So,
I'm glad. All right.
all right. Well, Todd, thank you.
Thank you. Keep up the good work. Keep me posted.
Okay, I will.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, I'll talk to you after a while.
Have a good weekend.
All right, take care.
Bye. You too. Bye.